Yeah, you know who it is, and for those of you that don't, I'm Cytonius, the opposite of the phoniest! From Speak Geek Unlimited. And what y'all not gonna do is disrespect Wesley Snipes. For fans of film of a certain age, the name Wesley Snipes is synonymous with straight-to-DVD films, being blacklisted by Hollywood, tax troubles, and the Marvel Comics character, Blade. It's easy to forget that Blade is the successful Marvel comic book film that helped to reinvigorate not only horror vampire films, but also it was Marvel's first successful R-rated film franchise. So after a game-changing first film and a dope-ass sequel, where did Blade as a film franchise go wrong? Well, the easy answer is the third film, Blade Trinity. The first two Blade films worked because of the swagger and athleticism of Wesley Snipes, and its expansion of the vampire mythology, but also because beneath the surface, those films had a story to tell. The first Blade film is about Blade coming to terms with his vampirism, and Blade 2 is about Blade coming to terms with his humanity. Blade Trinity is about the Night Stalkers? Check it out. The failure of Blade Trinity is often linked to Wesley Snipes and his supposed difficult behavior on the set of the film. The problem with this theory is that I think Blade Trinity was doomed almost from the beginning. After the success of Blade 2, New Line Cinema wanted to bring back director Guillermo del Toro to direct the third film. Scheduling issues with del Toro and his passion project, Hellboy, made him unavailable for the project. Stephen Norrington, the director of the first film, was also in talks to return to the franchise but turned it down because supposedly he wasn't feeling the script. German director Oliver Hirschenbeigel was also considered but unavailable because he was filming the movie Downfall, which was about the last days of Adolf Hitler. Even Wesley Snipes approached the studio about him directing the film, but was turned down by New Line Cinema. The studio chose screenwriter David S. Goyer, who wrote the first two films. Goyer had only directed one film before Blade Trinity, and that was the 2002 film Zigzag, which also featured Wesley Snipes, and grossed less than $3,000 during its theatrical run. The failure of Blade Trinity has less to do with Wesley Snipes and more to do with the studio making illogical casting choices and shutting out Wesley Snipes, who was an executive producer, fight choreographer, as well as star of the film. The entire Blade trilogy was co-produced by Wesley Snipes' film production company known as Amen-Ra. The film that Snipes wanted to make would have been an I Am Legend version of Blade that took place in the distant future where vampires took over and Blade is one of the last people on Earth. That's right, no Triple H and his vampire Pomeranian, no Night Stalkers, and no whack-ass Drake or Dracula or whatever the fuck they thought this shit was. What's interesting about Blade Trinity is that it starts off strong with Blade doing what he does best, hunting vampires. We see Blade's typical smooth, stylish, and precise method of killing vampires, as well as the camaraderie between Blade and Whistler. These are the things that make the franchise work. The plot of the film focuses on Blade and a group of young vampire hunters called the Night Stalkers. For those that don't know, the Night Stalkers was a group of vampire hunters from Marvel Comics that had a short-lived ongoing series that ran from 1992 to 1994. The trio consisted of the vampire hunter Blade, the vampire detective Hannibal King, and Frank Drake, who was a direct descendant of Dracula. In the film, Blade Trinity, the Night Stalkers are portrayed as a young and inexperienced group of vampire slayers, with Blade acting as their inspiration for killing vampires. Hannibal King is played by Ryan Reynolds, who plays King as a wisecracking, gun-toting, self-deprecating man of action. Sound familiar? Jessica Biel plays the character Abigail Whistler, who was created for the film and is Whistler's long-lost daughter. The film spends a lot of time trying to get us to like the Night Stalkers because David Goyer was looking to do spin-off films with Hannibal King and Abigail Whistler. The problem with this is that Jessica Biel doesn't have any type of charisma or screen presence, and Ryan Reynolds as Hannibal King is just, well, Deadpool light. An interesting fact about Hannibal King is that Colin Farrell was the original choice to play the character but turned it down. Blade Trinity is by far the most PG-13, gentrified version of a Blade film I have ever seen. All the defining traits and charm of the previous films in the franchise is missing. Blade seems like a supporting character in his own movie. Does anybody notice that Blade doesn't bite anyone in the film, or that he doesn't do the sunglasses trick, or gets charged up and beats the shit out of a bunch of vampires after being baptized in blood? The Blade films always stressed the importance and power of blood within the vampire mythology, and always had a sleek and cool visual aesthetic. The first two Blade films set the trend for a lot of what's being done with superhero films now. You can check out my thoughts on the first Blade film in the other video essay I made on Blade. Hell, Blade is the first modern comic book movie film to do the 3-point superhero landing, and you can't make a superhero movie these days without a superhero landing. The title Blade Trinity is a reference to this film being the third movie in the franchise, but also a reference to the Holy Trinity within the Christian religion. The Trinity, of course, is a reference to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Blade is supposed to be the manifestation of all three. He's the son of Whistler and eventually becomes a father figure to Abigail Whistler, and in many ways is a vampire god. He has all of their strengths and none of their weaknesses. In my previous video on Blade, I mentioned the symbolism of the number 3 and how the film's relationships are broken into threes, with Blade, Whistler, and Karen representing a mother, father, and son dynamic, and the villains Deacon Frost, Quinn, and Mercury representing an incestuous vampire trio. This film drops the ball in continuing that symbolism in favor of a new vampire trio consisting of Jocko Grimlow, played by Triple H, Asher Talos, played by Callum Keith Rennie, and Donica Talos, played by Parker Posey, who, in an alternate universe, has been playing the definitive version of Lois Lane in a Superman movie franchise for the past 10 years. To be honest, Parker Posey has the most charisma of any of the vampire antagonists in the movie, and should have been the central villain in the movie. She definitely gives off Stephen Dorff's Deacon Frost vibes, and she could have been an interesting take on a female version of Dracula, and they could have even based her on Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who is a Hungarian mass murderer and, according to many historians, is one of the inspirations for Bram Stoker's Dracula. This film's version of Dracula is one of the most non-threatening and milquetoast and underwhelming movie villains I've ever seen, and suffers from third movie villain syndrome alongside Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face in Batman Forever, Topher Grace as Venom in Spider-Man 3, Aldrich Killian in Iron Man 3, and even Bane in The Dark Knight Rises. Dominic Purcell has the look for a modern-day urban Dracula, but comes off like a villain in a CW superhero show. There's a lot of things wrong with Blade Trinity, such as the plot, the supporting cast, the cinematography, the editing, the choice of director, but not Wesley Snipes. In fact, Wesley Snipes is the best thing about Blade Trinity. Over the past couple of years, many of the people who worked on Blade Trinity have placed the blame of the failure on the film on Wesley Snipes, which I think is unfair. In fact, the person who I think is truly responsible for the failure of Blade Trinity is David Goyer. While David Goyer has helped to write some of the best comic book movies of all time, such as Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy and the Blade films, David Goyer's screenwriting career has been filled with more blockbuster misses than hits, with films such as Batman vs. Superman, Terminator Dark Fate, Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, The Crow City of Angels, and of course Blade Trinity, all failing to meet fan expectations. The films that Goyer have worked on that have been incredibly successful owe much of that success to limited studio interference and the vision of directors such as Guillermo del Toro on Blade 2, Alex Proyas on Dark City, and Christopher Nolan on the Batman films. David Goyer as a director lacks the vision and signature aesthetics to add anything new to the Blade films, which explains why Blade Trinity feels more like a raunchy horror comedy.
Where is this tracking node of yours?
It's in my left ass cheek. Fine. It's in my right ass cheek. Okay, okay, seriously now. It's in the meat of my butt, just below the Hello Kitty tattoo. Seriously, just pull down my tidy whities and see for yourself.
Enough! It's not funny anymore.
As opposed to think it's interesting that all of a sudden on the third film in a successful movie franchise, the star and producer of the film becomes this massive problematic figure, with many of the cast and crew throwing Wesley Snipes under the bus.
I am in Blade Trinity, which is... No. Here's what I'll say about Blade Trinity. If you watch... And by the way, I'm friends with the writer-director, and he agrees with me on this. If you just sit and watch Blade Trinity, it's a D-. It just doesn't work. But if you know what they went through to get that movie made, it is an A+. The fact that movie exists puts it above Citizen Kane. The fact that they, with all the craziness that went down, we were in Vancouver and Wesley Snipes was going crazy and he wouldn't come out of his trailer, and you'd walk by his trailer and this wall of pot stench would just like, whoa, and kind of push you to the side. And then he would only answer to the name Blade. You couldn't call him.
He would only answer to Blade.
The Blade, yeah.
In between accusations of physically attacking David Goyer and just flat out separating himself from the cast and crew, the thing that I think isn't discussed about Wesley Snipes' behavior on Blade Trinity is the reason for his discontent. Wesley Snipes and Chris Christopherson, who played Blade's mentor Whistler, were candid in their dissatisfaction with Blade Trinity. They both agreed that David Goyer was too inexperienced and lacked vision as a film director. They also agreed that Goyer was placing too much focus on the Night Stalker characters and that Blade didn't need any new sidekicks. For Blade Trinity, David Goyer was actually promoted to a producer on the film and used his newfound position to shut Wesley Snipes out of key elements of the film, such as casting and script approval. Even though Wesley Snipes had been a producer with script and casting approval on the 2 previous Blade movies. This is actually a major factor of why Wesley Snipes was so frustrated during the production of Blade Trinity. Snipes would go on to file a lawsuit against David Goyer and New Line Cinema, claiming that his status as a producer was downgraded without his approval. The lawsuit claimed that New Line Cinema withheld a portion of Snipes' salary as a punishment for quitting the film a third way through principal photography, with the studio having to use stuntmen and body doubles to finish the movie. Snipes would go on to make accusations of racism on the set, claiming that New Line Cinema strayed away from the trend of multicultural casting from the 2 previous Blade films in favor of a predominantly white cast. Blade Trinity will be the last time that Wesley Snipes will play the Daywalker, with rapper turned actor Kirk Sticky Fingers Jones taking up the role for a short-lived live-action TV show that aired on Spike TV in 2006. In 2008, Snipes will be sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for failing to file tax returns. This would prove to be another blemish on the legacy of Wesley Snipes. But is it even possible to blemish his legacy? In between the Blade Trinity and tax jokes, do we forget how incredibly talented and innovative Wesley Snipes really is? Before the Will Smiths, Idris Elbas, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnsons of Hollywood, Wesley Snipes was one of the biggest movie stars in Hollywood, and this was even before Blade. Whether or not you want to admit it, Wesley Snipes is the template for the modern-day black movie star. By mixing the dignified charisma of Sidney Poitier and the martial arts machismo of Jim Kelly and the swagger of Billy D. Williams, we had a black movie star who could do action films, comedy, drama, romance, who could be an athlete, a gangster, a maniacal villain, and hell, even a woman. With the announcement that rapper turned actor Mahershala Ali is taking on the role of Blade in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it just makes me appreciate Wesley Snipes as Blade even more. Wesley Snipes took a D-list Marvel character and made him so iconic that anyone who dares to play Blade in a future film will live in the shadow of not the character Blade, but the actor that made Blade famous. No matter how you feel about Wesley Snipes and his past with tax evasion, or how you may feel about Noxeema Jackson, or how you may feel about Blade Trinity, you can't deny this one fact, and that is that Wesley Snipes is Blade.